I am so excited to bring you our interview with Scott Wine. Scott spent 16 years as CEO, first at Polaris, which he led into the Fortune 500, then at CNH Industrial, where he worked with culture partners to overhaul a culture of 42,000 employees, making it more adaptable and resilient through the pandemic. We talk about his values, faith, integrity, and discipline, and how they impact his leadership, plus all the lessons he picked up over the years from mentors, from his naval service, and even from volunteering as a youth football coach. I think you'll really enjoy the conversation. Please welcome to the podcast, Scott Wine. Scott Wine, thank you for joining us. What is your why?
Jessica, first, thanks for having me on. Really excited what you guys do at Culture Partners and specifically what you do with this podcast. But, my why is pretty darn simple. It kind of started, I was very blessed to grow up in a small town, and faith and family have always been important to me. But, I went to the Naval Academy and I decided that I needed to or wanted to go to chapel every Sunday. And the why, I think, is best captured in a sentence in the midshipman prayer. And it says, keep me true to my best self, guarding me against dishonesty in purpose and in deed, and helping me so to live so that I can live for my shipmates, my loved ones, and me. And, that really has just encapsulates what drives me. I'm ridiculously competitive, but I try to keep that competitiveness towards the right thing, just knowing that those values are so important.
That's beautiful. My why is around faith as well. And I'm always grappling with the role that faith has in business and in leadership. And I want to talk about it more than it feels comfortable. Why can't we talk about faith at work more openly or freely, do you think?
I think because we've been encouraged not to, unfortunately. I don't want to get into a political discussion, but this whole woke thing that we're on suggests that that's a religion, and perhaps certain religions, aren't something that should be talked about. But I fully believe, there's a group of CEOs that, CEOs for faith. And, I consider myself one of those. And I don't want to be one that's a zealot and really kind of virtue signaling with it. But I think it's how we lead in a way that just, establishes and epitomizes the faith that we have.
What's interesting is a lot of the great leadership gurus of the last 50 years were devout religious people that were taking what their faith touted as, good morals or good ethics or good faith, and then changed the words a little bit to make it sound more secular. But all of the leadership gurus, think about servant leadership, right? Who talked about serving first, right? Yeah. That's a very religious idea that gets turned into a leadership thing that then catches wildfire. And I think a lot of people don't even realize the origins of where those ideas come from.
And if you just go all the way back, the things that Jesus taught us to how we should live our lives are good in business. They're good in faith. They're just, when people are honest and do a hard day's work, it really does make every business better. And I think, it's something we should all espouse to do.
So can we talk about because I see a lot of businesses thriving by not being honest, by not making those servant-focused decisions, right? That can also be very winning in a capitalist society. So it does feel like there's a balance between doing the right thing and doing the thing that works in order to get results. How do you manage that as a leader, especially in a publicly traded organization?
Well, one of the things that when I became a public company CEO, and, we often get chastised for managing to quarterly results. And I think we're all, it's the expectation that the street gives. But, I've really tried to make sure that the board was on a journey with me. What is our long-term purpose? What are we trying to achieve long-term? And as long as we're meeting our short-term commitments, but not prioritizing them over that long-term vision. And I believe, and I know it's not true, that those companies that you talk about that take shortcuts and aren't true to their customers or whatever, I don't believe that they're going to have long-term success. And I think if you look back over history, there's examples of businesses that have ultimately gotten in trouble with the SEC or ultimately their customers go away from it. And that's one of the things that I most value about the work we did with Culture Partners is just how it got us focused on customers and how we got, so many of our employees focused on doing what's right for the customer. And when you do that, it's hard to really get sideways with anything because if you're putting all of your resources towards doing right for customers, that's going to pay dividends over the long term against those competitors that might be taking shortcuts.
It's interesting. I've listened to some of your other interviews, and I've heard you talk about integrity and the importance of integrity, and that being one of your core values as a leader and in life generally. And I think there's not a lot of people who would say we don't value integrity, right? And there's a lot of people who fail to fulfill making decisions with integrity consistently, always over time, right? Sometimes we get pulled, even if we have the best of intentions and we're good people, we get pulled towards making decisions that lack integrity. What pulls us? When you have been struggling with that, when making the choice with integrity has been harder, why is it harder? Why is this something that we hear about all the time in leadership books? It must be because it's hard to do in practice.
I actually don't think so. I've left 2 jobs, both times because of integrity. I mean, that's how important it is to me. Rather than stay in a role where I was going to do something that was inconsistent, with my values, I would leave an organization before that. And I think as leaders, we've got to be able to stand up for that. That's how important integrity is, because once you breach that integrity, it gives permission to other people in the organization to do the same, and then you've got all kinds of problems to deal with.
Tell me more. What do you mean all kinds of problems to deal with?
Well, I mean, because, there's obviously the CEO or the leader of an organization has so much power and can make decisions that can ultimately derail the company. But what's probably worse is if you've got a lot of bad decisions that aren't based on integrity or aren't based on the values of the company, that's how the culture itself becomes bad. And that's how ultimately the downfall of a business or the backsliding of a business can happen, and not can, but will happen.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood. I thought you meant that once integrity is set in stone, then you have more problems somehow. So
No. Just the opposite of that.
Just the opposite, right. So you once said in an interview that leaders get bad information all the time, and you're trying to make your best decisions based on the information provided. And you said, I think if leaders can just make the right decision 60, 70, 80% of the time, you just got to keep going. So 60% of the time is that's just a little bit over half of the time you're making the right decision. Is that really all you really need to be generally moving in the right direction? Is more than often make the right decision?
I actually know the context of that statement. And what I was talking about is, speed wins. And I when I worked for Bob Johnson at Honeywell or Allied Signal, when I first got out of the Navy, really we were fixing aircraft engines, and that turnaround time, how quickly you were giving those assets back to the customer, was really important. And what I realized that we weren't always going to have the absolute perfect information. The spreadsheet was never going to have everything that I needed. But once you have enough cycles of learning, once you have enough wisdom, I think, and the team around you has that knowledge, I think you've got to trust your gut sometimes and go with that decision and move a little bit faster. And the thought about 60% is good enough. I would rather be 60% right and go fast than 100% right and go slow. And I think you got to be really careful about what you're missing when you do that. But most of the time, I do believe that if you trust your team and you trust your gut, you're going to be able to go a little bit faster and do a little bit better for the business and your customers.
What about when you can't trust your team? Tell us about what your old manager at Allied Signal said about turnaround and what your 2 choices are.
Tom, that was, there's just some life events that you just remember every single bit of. And, I never will forget when Julia was leaving the job. She was my customer service representative. And so we were supporting regional airlines. And, it was her job to talk about, why their engine wasn't back and what we were going to do and how we were going to help them with it. And she was so good at it. When she said she was going to leave, I was panicked. And so I went in, I was the I had all of the support functions, and I went into the operations guy. Tom was a big burly guy, barrel chested, and lots been there for a long time, and I was only there a year or two. And I went in and I said, Tom, she's going to leave, and I really got to find a way to keep her to stay. We can't possibly, survive without her. And he took his big fat finger and he stuck it in my coffee cup. And and he said, Scott, what just happened? I said, you put your fat finger in my coffee. He said, no. What happened when I took it out? And I'm like, nothing. He goes, exactly. He goes, organizations are just like that. There'll be a few ripples, and then you're going to be fine. And it was just a great lesson for me. All of us, no one is irreplaceable in an organization. And Tom just did a great way of illustrating how that works and why it's important.
Oh, I love that. What a terrifying story. I mean, did you think to say, well, there are germs in my coffee now that I don't necessarily want to drink?
I didn't realize. First of all, I like my morning coffee so much, I'm going to have it no matter what. And secondly, I do believe there's some truth in the fact that the more germs you have, the less likely you're going to get sick over time. So I don't mind eating things off the floor or even having Tom's finger in my coffee.
I love it. So, and I remember Marcus told me a story. Marcus, one of the senior partners here, managing directors at Culture Partners, said that one time you were in a room together talking about a particular challenge, and you said the two options that we have are to change the people or to change the people.
Yeah, that was.
How do you know when you change the people and when you change the people?
That was another one of my bosses at Allied Signal, and Ralph was quite a character, but he told me it was my first real general management job, and I had a military repair and overhaul center, and I was lamenting about some of the people and what should I make changes, and do I need to top grade? And he just looked at me very clearly and in a very slow voice said, Scott, change the people or change the people. And he just sat there. And it just resonated with me that he was exactly right. I grew up, my father was CEO of an electric cooperative, and, it's a small town, and I saw, the people that sometimes that weren't as good as I think he thought at the time could or should be, but it was hard to make a change in an environment like that because you're kind of stuck with them. And I kind of took that as a challenge myself, is that I would never, let an organization endure someone that shouldn't be there, didn't enable the company to be, or the group to be as good as they could or should be. And what Ralph was talking about is you either change the culture, change the performance, change the priorities of the person, or you need to bring in someone else. And that's so true, because as leaders, we have a responsibility. This whole idea that Culture Partners preaches of accountability is something that I believe deeply in. But part of accountability is a leader explaining what's expected of someone. And that means you don't just get rid of someone right away. So you can change them. You can change how they're seeing a situation, how they're reacting to a situation, how they're leading their people. But if they're unwilling to change, it's really a leader's responsibility to make that change. And I think what too many leaders don't understand is the whole organization knows when someone's not getting it done. They know when someone's not leading the right way, delivering results the right way. And if we tolerate that as leaders, then it's ultimately reflecting on us. And that idea of change the people or change the people is just a very simple but true statement.
How long do you give for people to change? I mean, what is it that gets you to realize it's time to swap the person out for someone else after you've given them a chance? Is it a gut thing? Is it a series of conversations? Is there a general rule?
First of all, there is a general rule that I will never fire someone that doesn't expect it. I will make sure that they understand the need for them to change in a way that can be better for the business. And, usually if you're very serious about it, you've got to put it in writing, because so often people, no matter what you say, they don't believe it until you put it in writing. And I think once you've done that and the person doesn't change, it really is time to get them out, because the organization needs it.
Yeah. So you've been through changes. So going back, you were Polaris for how many years?
12 years and 4 months.
12 years, and it went from something like a $1 billion company to an $8 billion company.
No,
I mean, you took it into the Fortune 500, right?
Yeah, we did. It was 1.8 billion because I started right after the Solomon failed and the whole 2008 financial crisis, and we took a big hit, went down. So the first full year I was there, we did 1.8, and I think the last year was there, we did 6, and they went on to do 8 right after, through the pandemic when things exploded a little bit. But it's a great organization, and that one I didn't really understand culture as well as I understand it now, but Polaris had a can-do. We called it a getter done. They would find a way to get things done. So he had great engineering, great ingenuity, and ultimately allowed us to deliver great products for our customers. And that was a great one. It was one of those jobs. It was absolutely as much fun as you think it would be. I mean, I really did enjoy going to work every day.
Okay, and then you joined CNH. And so was the culture similar in any way, or was it completely different?
The cultures could not have been more opposite. Polaris was, we would go fast. We would, very agile. We pushed accountability down. Everything was about how you could deliver for customers. You make the riding experience better. And that really was like every single person in Polaris felt that they contributed to that mission. And then I get to CNH, and it's a very big global company. But it took me about 2 weeks to realize that the bureaucracy was so thick, we had to find a way to cut through it. And ultimately, that's what led me to Culture Partners, is because I needed to find a way that I didn't really understand at the time about how we were going to get the culture to really shift. And really proud of what we did. We had 42,000 employees that bought into our cultural beliefs and really recognized the importance that they had, every single employee, in ultimately serving our customers. And, as we did that, you saw the bureaucracy just melt away. And it didn't happen overnight, but you could really feel the difference in how we reacted. And it was rewarding to hear so many of our dealers and customers recognize that as well. Now, even 3.5 years, when I left, it was still more bureaucratic than our customers wanted, and still more bureaucratic than I should have allowed. But we were on a path that we knew that was going to get better over time.
So the bureaucracy, was it simply just due to the larger size? Was it historical bureaucracy that had always existed? Why do you think it was that way?
I think it was that way because there was so many different units of power, if you will, that there was a lot of inward looking. I have a leadership hack that I stole from another Naval Academy grad, Kevin Sherry, that when he was at Amgen and he was promoted to be the CEO, he sat down, and there's a great Harvard Business Review, 2004, I think. It's called A Time for Growth. And Kevin talked about, how he sat down with, the top probably 100 or 200 people in the company and ask them, 5 questions. And it gave him an opportunity. What 3 things do you want me to change? What 3 things do you want to protect? What are you worried I might do? What do you want me to do? What else do you want to talk about? And those are simple questions. But when you ask hundreds of people those questions, you get a really good guidepost of what's wrong and where you need to go. And I did the same thing at CNH. I don't think a single person talked about customers, not one. They were,
wow.
And it wasn't their fault. It was just the energy was inward, and whether it's organizational changes or the political dynamics, but that's where the energy was. And I think over 3.5 years, we made a lot of progress in turning that around.
So CNH was coming after you a couple times before you really considered it, right? When you originally were approached by the recruiter, I think I remember you saying, sorry, I'm too busy running this company to talk to you about running that company, which is such a funny response. I mean, in my mind, that really stood out to me as an interesting insight into the way that your brain works, right? Because I guess it demonstrates the commitment or the commitment to the purpose, right? Because
Well,
I can't run another company. I'm running this company.
Well, but in fairness, it was during COVID. So trying to guide a company through COVID and making sure that we were going to be okay, that was a responsibility that I just didn't think it was right to leave a company in that somebody else trying to come in and guide through that type of situation. But it quickly became apparent to me that Polaris was not only going to survive, probably thrive in that situation and continue to have the dialogue. But what I got drawn to is, CNH has great brands like, the New Holland, the Case IH, Case Construction, really, really good brands. The distribution partners are quite good. And the products are solid. So I knew they had the foundation, and I just felt like some consistent, strong leadership would be a great opportunity for me. And it turns out it was. I don't have any regrets about going to CNH. I'm really proud of what the team accomplished. And it was it was a great decision going there and great decision leaving. So I couldn't be more happy.
I'm interested in that transition because at Polaris, you were the chairman of the board and the CEO. And then at CNH, you were just the CEO. So was that a difficult transition? Was it surprising?
I just like running companies. So as long as the my kind of cardinal rule is, as long as somebody's if they're not getting in the way I'm running the company, it doesn't really matter. And that's how it worked at CNH. I wasn't interested in being in an environment where it's confusing for a team if there's multiple leadership voices. And so I made it pretty clear if I was going to take the job, this is how it would run. And that's for the most part, that's how it worked.
So was there resistance to removing bureaucracy from employees in your journey at CNH?
Not a single employee. They wanted to be able to go faster and do more and be more focused on customers. And, most of it was a leadership driven thing. And, part of even lean, I'm a big proponent of lean. And I think to the extent that you can engage employees into helping solve problems in their own work area and make things better for customers. It's lightning in a bottle. It's really that good. The way they had approached it was more of an audit-based thing. So, that you could do the work and then you get audited and you get a score for it. And it was, a lot of it was good, but none of it was really talking about how are we ultimately going to be better for customers. And I think just tweaking some of those small things, were taking the foundation that was probably okay and just making it more agile, making it more customer focused. And as we made those changes, the employees were so eager for us to go faster and do more.
So I'm curious about how pressure for CEOs has increased. The leadership challenge has transformed post-COVID. Now, and I'm not just talking about remote work or whatever that, the kind of logistical elements of it. But to me, it feels like COVID was transformational in the shared cultural beliefs of society about the nature of our relationship with work. And the experience of COVID made us realize, whoa, maybe I don't need to care about work as much, or maybe I haven't been spending as much time with my family, or maybe I don't feel like it's as fair the way that it's set up. It feels like something's in the air. Do you agree with that statement first? And then I'll ask my follow-up.
I agree with that happening some places. Both Polaris and CNH were manufacturing companies, and our the largest portion of our employees are manufacturing employees. And guess what? They went to work every day. They didn't get a chance to say, I'm going to work from home, because, that tractor's got to be put together with somebody screwing the bolts on and somebody painting it. And, that requires everyone to go in. So, we were kind of always drawn to the fact that as leaders in that organization, we should also follow that example. I think we got away from it longer and further than we should have. And I think people noticed that, hey, why are they being treated differently just because they work in an office and I'm working in a plant and I have to go to work every day and they don't. So, that's kind of, what we tried to focus on and set the example. But it's a big global company. So a lot of times, a lot of the work that we did was on these kind of calls because, we had people all over the world, and sometimes that work could be done from home.
But with the pace of change is quickening, right? I mean, even just AI now, I mean, that completely transforms the way that leaders need to think about their business. If you were to go into an MBA today, as opposed to 20 years ago, it feels like all the courses, many of the courses would be different, right? You take the basics around finance and balance sheets, and then, strategic thinking has evolved. The way we show up for each other has evolved. The priorities that we place. Do you think that being a leader today is significantly different than maybe when you started at Polaris, or does it feel basically the same to you?
I think it is changing very rapidly. I use generative AI every single day. There's never a day that I'm not doing something that gives me an answer, a better answer, a different answer, a more complete picture than I could have gotten previously. And I think that as we see that permeate down through an organization, we're going to realize that we've just got too many people doing things. And I don't know if you listen to the All In podcast, but they talk about just how there's going to be very successful startups with 10 or 12 people doing something because there's just so much capability from generative AI. And I don't think, you talk about business school, and unfortunately it was more than 20 years ago that I did that, but I don't think they've yet figured out how to build this really into the curriculum. I mean, I know they're talking about it tangentially, but it's going to have to be a primary focus. And I think how we capture that as a nation is really important, because ultimately it's a bit of an arms race about who could be better at this. I mean, think about the challenges that we have with China. They've got a declining population that's going to be a problem for them, and generative AI, and whether it ultimately comes out as humanoids. Elon's doing a lot of work with that, where that could go. I mean, I think that 5 years from now we're going to have this conversation and be surprised. It's one of those things that's going to go slow and then really, really fast. And I believe generative AI is going to be a great example of that happening.
Yeah, I am afraid about it, frankly. I mean, I think that the arms race mentality and wanting to win in business is going to have us cut corners. And we just saw the news about OpenAI. They're no longer going to be structured around their nonprofit board. They're going to be a for-profit organization. And so that unleashes a number of decisions that may not have been made prior, right? And so basically means follow the money. And the money doesn't necessarily come from the things that help society and social good. The money comes from things like defense contracts and addictive behaviors that Americans and globally that people engage in, right? So I'm getting more and more nervous as I continue to learn about this.
Well, I think we all should be nervous, because there's going to be nefarious actors. And, we see what's happening in the Middle East right now. I mean, there is a lot of risk in the world, and you certainly don't want the bad guys to have access to that. I mean, you think about all of the problem, we've had with hacking, they're going to have just much better, more powerful, faster tools to come after us with. But I mean, if you look back at history, whether it was internal combustion engines or electricity, I mean, I grew up in a small town, and there was horse and buggies, and we transitioned as a country from relying on horses for transportation to all of a sudden having engines. And I think over time we make those transitions as a society, and we find ways. I mean, that is capitalism, really. You find ways to constantly reinvigorate. I just think we need to make sure we have the proper guardrails with generative AI, because there are going to be bad actors. There are going to be bad things that can happen with it. And we've just got to be careful to ensure that those are not catastrophically bad.
Yeah, but see, I don't think that it has to be. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg would consider himself a bad actor, right? I mean, I just watched a video online the other day of him getting his acceptance email to Harvard Business School, and his dad has got the VHS camera and he's recording the moment, and he's all, like typical teenage boy, excited without showing excitement, like, oh, that's great. I got into Harvard. And it's this innocent boy that then created social media, which I don't think he was trying to create increased levels of anxiety and depression in young people. I think he was trying to bring people together in community. But the guardrails obviously weren't there, and now we're seeing the very destructive nature of social media on culture and society broadly. What unforeseen consequences of AI development are going to happen to our society that it's not China, right? I'm not worried about Russia. I'm worried about, oh, this is a good product. People seem to be liking it. And then it's the fragmentation of our consciousness and the dissolving of the humanity. That's the thing I'm afraid of. And CEOs being motivated to drive profit will make decisions that are profitable. And then we don't see what happens next, right? I mean, we don't see the consequence 5 years, 10 years down the line. How do you fix that?
Well, I think the way we fix it is talking about the product. The fact that you're now having that conversation and we're having this dialogue, I think that's really key. Way too much has happened in this country. And if you think about the unhealthy nature of what's happened to America versus our other nations and how that ultimately is attributed to big pharma and big food,
right.
Where's the dialogue about that? There wasn't this ongoing dialogue. I think the press failed us, I think, too many times. And I think the fact that we're starting to have these conversations earlier are going to allow us. There's so many good, smart people in this country. And I think as long as we keep this at the forefront, we have the ongoing discussions and we make it part of how we move forward together. But I think there's unfortunately going to be times where inadvertent bad things happen. Who would have ever thought the iPhone? You blamed Facebook, but really it's the phone. I mean, if you look at what happened to teens all across the world once they got access to a phone that can provide, what their friends were doing all the time and all kinds of, things that they're following that probably or possibly aren't good for them. And we didn't know that, but I think somehow, and maybe AI can help us, we're going to have to be more thoughtful about what are the risks that we need to consider. We consider risks all the time. And I'm in the board of US Bank and more than half of the things that we're talking about is risk. And I don't think as a society we've yet looked at some of these things that you're discussing, whether it's generative AI or phones or anything else, how much risk is inherent in those things that we should be discussing.
How can you proactively be anticipating risk and thinking about risk while also at the same time trying to move quickly and be agile? I mean, what does it look like in business as a CEO to balance those two things?
One of the things that I talk about quite often is how much value I place on critical thinking. And critical thinking for me is the ability to see around corners, to anticipate not just, what the next thing is, but what's the next thing and the next thing, and what else could happen down the road. And I will tell you, if I look at who are the best leaders in my organization and who are the people that I promote the fastest, it's often the best critical thinkers because they're just anticipating things. And even when they make a mistake, they recognize the risk and they can pivot quickly from that mistake because they thought about it and wasn't surprised by it. And I think if you think back, we've gotten away from this idea of an education that isn't all STEM. But a lot of times if you get educated on the humanities and get a more broad-based education, it gives you a better idea history is such a good lesson for us. And if we study history a little bit more, you understand how we should approach things because even though they manifest themselves in different ways, they're really not many new problems.
Right. They're just in new clothing.
Exactly.
New buzzwords, right? To describe the same old.
Exactly.
So you left CNH, you stepped down earlier this year. What now?
Well, it's funny because I had my 35th reunion at the Naval Academy recently, and I felt old as crap. I mean, I was, I'm really, really old. But I talked to people in, the recruiting industry or other, and I'm 57, so I'm really not that old. But
you can't retire yet. Don't even try.
No. I'm not going to. I had no intentions of retiring. But, I'd been a CEO for 16 years, just barely shy of 16 years. And I realized if I'm really going to do something different, it's better to do it when you're 57 than 65. And I've got a lot of energy left, and it just seemed like the right time to do that. I'm incredibly proud of what we accomplished in the 3.5 years I was at CNH. I had a recruiter tell me recently, he's like, Scott, we regularly use as an example of what you did at Polaris. And I'm like, that's interesting. And I'm proud of, that body of work. But I really feel like what we did in 3.5 years at CNH is actually more impressive. I mean, it was, we got the company more focused on customers. We spun off the heavy duty truck division. We acquired Raven and brought in our technology stack in-house, and just really proud of it. But I wouldn't have left if I didn't think the team and the business was on path to success. But I do feel like that. And I think Garrett Marks is the right guy to lead that organization. And I get a chance to really, I've been incredibly blessed. I mean, really, I don't ever want to forget that. But when I was getting out of the Navy, I worked for General Powell. I ran an executive dining room for General Powell. I was a head cook and bottle washer, if you will. Great experience. But I was going to work on his campaign. That's what's just super easy. Got my MBA, 7 years in the Navy. I'm going to work on General Powell's presidential campaign. And he clearly would have won that election. But he decided not to run for very, very valid reasons. And I said, sir, I respect your decision, but I need a job. And do you know anybody in the investment banking world? And he ultimately put me in touch with Rich Armitage. Ambassador Armitage was a football player at Navy, and kind of said, Scott, my best friend in town is a guy named Dan Daniello. And Dan Daniello was one of the three guys that founded the Carlyle Group. And Dan became a friend and a mentor for me literally my entire adult life. I mean, he wouldn't hire me. He said I wouldn't be his best analyst and I wouldn't like discounting cash flows, but he said, learn how to run businesses and you can come back and do it for me someday. And so every job change, I would call Dan up and he'd give me some advice. And it just seems like if I'm going to do that, now's probably the time to do it.
Okay. So there it is. I was thinking you're being very evasive about what the actual next thing is, but so it's some form of mentorship, of working with leaders, of helping grow the next generation. Private
equity. There's some great firms out there doing great work. The markets are incredibly large. The companies they buy are incredibly large. And, I think the cycles of learning that I've been fortunate enough to acquire over these last, really 20, it's scary how long I've been doing it. But, from the leadership in the Navy to running a lot of different businesses, I just think it's a great opportunity to be able to do that more broadly than just being CEO of a single company.
So, what's interesting, kind of tying this to what we were talking about earlier, I think private equity gets a bad rap, and there are stories we could tell about private equity gutting and just tearing apart organizations. But there's also an opportunity for private equity to do things differently and to elevate leadership. Because if you think about publicly traded companies and the short-term quarterly earnings that are the motivator of most decisions for most leaders that maybe don't have as much of a penchant for integrity as you do, private equity is free of that pressure, the quarterly pressure, right? There is some form of pressure, but ultimately when they invest in a company, they've got a 3 to 5 year track that they're looking for growth. And so they are able to invest on the front end for something out on the other end. I've talked to Pete Stavros, who is over at KKR.
I love Pete. He's fantastic.
Isn't that incredible? The employee stock ownership program and being motivated to drive ownership by not only a culture of ownership and a culture of accountability, but dollars and cents and the difference that makes in people's mentality and therefore commitment. It's so logical. And of course, private equity is leading the way. It makes perfect sense, much more sense than publicly traded companies, right?
Well, with publicly traded companies, they tried the same thing with stock options. I will tell you, one of the secrets of success we don't talk about all the time, Polaris was an ESOP. When it founded, so there's
it was?
It was tremendous. And the profit sharing program that they have, many, not dozens, but hundreds of millionaires in that company because that's how that they created it. And I think that's Pete's onto something really, really big. This idea of engaging ownership, it really does work.
Yeah. So when I asked him about it, he said there's resistance from CEOs and investors because they're worried about dilution. They're worried about how complicated it would be. They don't think it actually works. I was surprised to hear that it's been more of a battle. To me, it's so logical, right? And it sounds like to you, it seems very logical too, but apparently when he actually has the conversations, a lot of the CEOs are resistant to the idea because they just don't buy it.
No, I mean, I'm not so. That is a natural feeling. I mean, if you're sharing part of the upside, that the aversion to that is somewhat understandable, I would say. I mean, I don't aspire to, or I don't agree with it, but it's one of the things that can happen. But if you look at the results, I mean, look at what he and Vicente Reynal did with Ingersoll Rand, and a lot of that was around this ownership culture, and just time after time you can prove that it works. And if you can engage employees, they're going to help you solve problems faster, they're going to help you serve customers better. I mean, ultimately, value creation isn't in the C-suite. Value creation is really down on the shop floor. If you read the book The Goal, I mean, I read it regularly because it's a constant reminder about where we're creating value in an organization. And why shouldn't you reward those employees that are creating that value?
Right. And it's, to me, it's not about a slice of the pie. It's about growing the pie, right? Your pie will get bigger if everyone actually cares, if they're committed. And the purpose statement, in my opinion, isn't enough to create a purpose-driven organization. No matter how many times you repeat it in a meeting, the purpose statement is just a statement. There have to be the experiences on a day-to-day basis that reinforce and back up that purpose statement, so that it's not just that we're working towards something important, but also the people by my side care as much as I do. They care about me. They see my value. All of that has to happen in order for that mission statement to actually mean something. And shared ownership is the ultimate of experiences and of culture driving experiences that will motivate new behavior. So I think that's something to watch. You should do that. That's my advice. Not that you asked for it on what your next move is.
I talked about my first job at Allied Signal, but then I got to go run a business in Greer, South Carolina, and we actually created T-shirts that said "Winning is fun." And you think about winning for an individual. If they're winning and having more money for their family, that's a real motivator. Not only are they serving customers better, they're having more fun at work, but they're getting rewarded for it. And I think that's something we should all aspire to deliver.
Interesting. Can I ask you about discipline really quickly before I get to my last question? I was about to wrap it up, but then that made me think about, you strike me as someone who has a lot of discipline. And the more CEOs that I interview for culture leaders, the more I'm seeing this trend of just intense, vigorous discipline in their personal and professional lives, right? You talked about there isn't a day I don't get my workout in, and if I'm in a hotel traveling, I will run up the hotel stairs to 100 stories in the hotel to get that workout in. Not everyone has that way of living, right? Do you think that discipline is an inevitable skill set to be a successful CEO, or is that just one type of CEO?
I think we're all going to manifest discipline in a different way, but I think some element of discipline is a requirement to be a successful CEO. The demands on your schedule, I always say I was immensely prepared to be a CEO. I literally had all the jobs, all of the training. I was completely unprepared for the incessant demand on my time and my money. Honestly, I had no idea how many charities there were, how many politicians there were that wanted money, or just people I want 5 minutes, I want 10 minutes, I want an hour, just your schedule. So I think there takes some discipline to being able to say no to those types of things. But if you're not careful, there's lunch meetings, there's breakfast meetings, there's dinner meetings. So that's why I think the discipline around working out, of staying in shape, is really, really important, because the job will suck you in if you let it. And I just refuse to let it. We had a moderate degree of success when I was at Polaris. I coached youth football every year for 8 years while my sons were playing. Because wow. It meant I had to leave. The funny thing is, the head coach of one of the teams was my IT leader. So I was the assistant coach and he was the head coach. And it was it was a great experience for me, but I had to have the discipline to be able to leave work at 4:30 a couple days a week so I could go do that.
Wow. I can't fathom that. Here I am running a podcast, trying to get people to learn about the power of culture. And I can barely get to my daughter's practices. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, how old are your kids now?
One's 24 and one's going to be 21 in October. So.
Okay. Are you going to take some time off and go do some trip around the world or something? Before you jump into the next thing, or have you already?
I've been off for 2.5 months now, or 3 months now. And that's about all I can do. I've got a wonderful wife and a wonderful relationship. I don't think she likes having me around that much. So I'm getting close.
Yeah. You know, my dad was the CEO, and when he was 59, he sold everything he owned and he bought a motorcycle and a sidecar, and he left on a 12-year trip around the world.
Wow.
And he called it the timeless ride. So there's food for thought if you decide you want some. And he stayed married to my mom, by the way. Yeah. They were together those whole 12 years, long distance.
Wow.
And she was into it. They'd been together for however many decades.
That's awesome.
We'll be better if you're far away.
That's awesome.
Isn't that cute? Okay, so my last question is, what is something you don't get asked very often in these types of interviews that you wish you were asked more often?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, but I'll tell you the one is really, nobody ever asks me kind of what's the secret to my success. I mean, if they always assume it's the Naval Academy, but no one really asks the simple question.
Okay, well, here we go. I'm ready. What is the secret to your success?
I married up in a big way. Honestly, I talked about Jill and I've been married 35 years, but we've moved 9 times, every move over 1,000 miles. I've traveled for work all the time. I work late at night, and, she has been the one, been a perfect mother, perfect wife, really enabled so much of my success. And I just can't imagine being on this journey. And I honestly don't think it would have happened if, she wasn't by my side the whole way.
No, that's so beautiful. What a wonderful way to end it. And what is her name?
Jill. She ran.
Jill.
Yeah. So while I was working, she ran 21 marathons.
No way.
Yeah. So
wow.
You think I've got a little bit of discipline. I mean, her discipline, she's an Air Force brat. So we kind of, we dated for all of 6 months before we got married, and 3 of those months I was out to sea. So I don't think
Wow.
I kind of tricked her.
How did you meet?
We met in a bar in Long Beach, California. It's actually Seal Beach, California.
Wow.
But
Story as old as time. We met in a bar and the rest was history. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insights. It's been such a pleasure to learn about you in preparation for today. And I've heard about you for so many years because you're connected to so many of the people that I work with, but now to actually get to spend some time with you and to get insight into how your brain works and the leadership lessons that you were able to share with us, it's just been a total honor. So
thanks, Jessica. And congratulations on what you've done with the podcast and what you're doing for Culture Partners and really elevating culture for all of us. So great work. Thank you.